Voters are divided on the most important issues in their vote for the president. Tonight, 23 ABC has assembled a panel of local political analysts who are weighing in on the issues in the race for the presidency and other races that have a direct impact on you. Let's bring in 23 ABC's Alex Bell, once again joining us live from downtown with a look at what we can expect from our analysts. Alex?
Yes, we're live here at the Fox Theater. Let's get straight back to our panelists. We know there were some thoughts that we wanted to finish up here. So, Matthew, let me go ahead and start with you. I know the last question I asked is this going to be the future of voting, the vote by mail system?
Well, I think it's too early to tell that. I think certainly when you look at California, permanent absentees, again, that clear distinction of whether you've asked for that ballot or whether you haven't. In 1980, 5% of Californians voted permanent absentee ballot. When you look at 2016, 59% of Californians. 2018, 67%, right, voted permanent absentee ballot. So we've seen an uphill shift, and actually in Kern County, it's a little bit higher, actually, about 72% in 2018. So we're constantly seeing more folks wanting to vote by mail, but the distinction is whether you've asked for it. And that's what we're seeing for the first time in 2020 with mail-in ballots. And
just another question with going with that. Why do you think it matters if you asked for it or you didn't? Wouldn't it help voters that just already get it in the mail and then they can have the option to drop it off or not?
Well, sure, it's a good question. An example of where it can go astray is, let's say that you have somebody, especially older voters, 65 and up, they like to vote at the polls, right? So they get this ballot at their house and they go to the polls anyway. And let's say that they leave their ballot at home. And yes, the elections office has sent out different postcards, but heck, people miss things in their mail. It's real small. That says if you don't bring your ballot to the polls with you, the one that was mailed to you, right? In this case, for the first time voter who usually votes at the polls, if they try to go vote at the polls like they normally do and they don't have that ballot that they got in the mail, then now they have their ballot is considered a provisional, right? And so if you want your vote if you don't want to have a provisional situation, then it's better to just be able to vote at the polls like you normally have.
But
right?
Provisional, they still check it. It's just more back end on the Kern County Elections Office to check it, but they still count the vote.
That's right. But it you ask what's a distinguishing.
What's the downfall?
Factor?
To everyone getting a ballot.
It can be confusing, right? I've been voting at the polls for the last 30, 40 years, and heck, I got this mail-in ballot. I like to go to the polls, right? No, you leave it at home. It's just a caveat that a lot of folks that like to vote at the polls.
So you think it would just be more confusing for voters?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And one other thing on this, in 2012, the state legislature under Governor Brown passed a law that stopped the purging of the voter rolls. And what I mean by that, a lot of times Democrats say, oh gosh, you purge the rolls, you make it harder for people to vote. What it used to be is if you didn't vote for 4 election cycles, you were purged off the rolls, right? And so this stopped that. And again, the problem is, and I know what you were saying earlier about this too, that essentially, well, yeah, there's protection mechanisms if somebody, voted here, or they moved, or they voted there, but it just makes it it would make the mail-in, and rather than the permanent absentee, much smoother, right? If we purge the rolls, let's say if you haven't voted in 3, 4 election cycles, right? Allow that person to re-register wherever they are. Maybe we've had folks that come to the party headquarters that got 2 or 3 ballots because they got, their married name and their maiden name, right? So things like that. I think that mail-in ballots, they have a much larger rate of having potential error rather than absentee, you've asked for it.
Okay. And Janine, I'll get straight to you in just a second. Kathy, I just want to ask you the same question as well. I know we were talking about mail-in ballots. Do you think that's the future? And also, do you think that there could be any issues with moving forward, everyone getting a vote by mail ballot?
Well, I do think it's the future, and I think sometimes you don't know that you can't go to the ballot box. You can't go that day. You get an appendicitis attack. I talked to a guy who really was upset one time because he was in the hospital. And I don't know. We can't foresee everything. But I do think, to Matthew's point, there is always room for improvement in any system, and there probably is room for improvement in this system too, with mail-in ballots or automatic mail-in ballots. Also, we don't really know necessarily how mail-in ballots really truly worked this time because we had many post offices that were dismantled. We have ballots that didn't get where they were going. People were actually disenfranchised because they mailed their ballot and it's not going to get there in time, yet they mailed it. They mailed it probably in plenty of time. but it didn't get there. And so I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but I do think it is the way of the future. Also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's actually cheaper for the taxpayer to do mail-in balloting. You don't have to rent spaces, you don't have to train as many people, you don't have to get the equipment. I believe that was one of the benefits that Oregon found. They found that they had a higher rate of return, more people actually did vote, and also it was cheaper for the taxpayer. Somebody should check me on that. But
Janine, I
think
see you
that's
shaking
right.
your head back there.
That's the information I've also heard,
Is that-
and that
okay,
they've also
you
had
too?
a higher level of
Okay, I don't want to
voter turnout with
misspeak.
that.
Okay.
And then you were also going to say something to follow up with Matthew. I
Just a
believe, as well.
couple of things too. I think that one thing and again, of course, any system could always be improved upon. I think that that's a fair point by several of the comments that have been stated in regards to the mail-in ballots. But the other thing I think that we're kind of discounting is that we have had a massive information campaign about mail-in ballots. People were given a lot of notice in advance about the mail-in voting system. I mean, this is not something that was done just 30 days before the election. This was something where voters were notified months before the election. They received their ballot 3 weeks. We've had tons of public service campaigns, tons of things on social media, tons of things through the news. And so the idea that it would just be so confusing for people, I'm not saying that there might not be a level of confusion, but there's also been a lot of education on voting by mail that I think that we're discounting. And again, the more we do it, the better that we'll get at it, right? And we'll improve the process. And then on the flip side, for the comment in regards that for older people, it can be difficult. In some ways, one could argue for some elderly people who aren't as mobile or may not have a way to get to the polls, the mail-in ballot can be a very good way for them to practice and safe way for them to practice the franchise.
And just a follow-up question to that, do you think that we've already seen some disinformation or misinformation about the safety of mail-in voting? And do you think we've seen that here in Kern County?
You know, in particular in Kern County, I think we've seen probably about the same that we've seen throughout the country, just with the rhetoric that we have seen the administration give in regards to not being able to trust voter by mail, that it's more susceptible to fraud. I think that that's some of the rhetoric that we have heard in different parts of the country, not just necessarily into Kern County. And I think that that's partly because that is coming from leadership, and that's also in part because we have not exercised the franchise in such a wide capacity in regards to voting by mail. So it may lead to some false assumptions, for example. But in terms of election security, we've also had new mechanisms be established where now, I mailed in my ballot, and in 2 days I could go onto the Secretary of State's website on my phone. And I even saw Vince Fong was very good about advertising this information to his constituents. He's my member of the State Assembly. And you could go ahead, you could see the date that it was received, and you could verify that it was counted. And if it wasn't counted, it even gave you a link and additional information for you to follow up on your ballot.
So you think that the state overall has done a good job in informing
I think they've
people
done the
about
best
mail-in
that they can given the circumstances that we're in, the unprecedented circumstances that we're in.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. And we'll come back to our panel in just a second. Coming up in a little bit, we'll talk about the Senate and congressional races that are going on, as well as the integrity of the election. And we're going to discuss disinformation and misinformation, the difference between the two, and have we seen any, and will it impact this election? But for now, I'm going to send it back over to you, Jess and Mike.